Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Filmmakers Co-op celebration of the films of Lynne Sachs. And yay, Lynn Sachs, an amazing retrospective of her work. And this here is the Filmmakers Cooperative. We're the oldest, largest distributive experimental avant-garde new media, founded in 1961 by Jonas Mekas. The amazing thing about the Filmmakers Co-op is that it continues to survive, and we're celebrating our 60th anniversary. It's been through like 5 different locations and moving 5,000 films, amazing. But during COVID, it was difficult. We came up with digitizing, VOD, and I want to say that Lynn Sachs has been an honored board of directors for 17 years, and now she's on our board of advisors. And to me, being on Zoom, being with our community is important. I love Zoom because Zoom provides an opportunity for us to hear each other's stories. It's storytelling, it's a sense of community and sharing each other's lives. And when the COVID started, Susan, who's here, is doing a website on women artists. And I asked Lynn to, and I did an interview about my films to be on her website. So actually the first serious interview I did on Zoom was with Lynn Sachs. And anyone can be a member. You can join the co-op, and Rachel and Henri are doing New Year, New Works. Jack Waters has been a longtime member, and he's on our board of advisors. He was on our board of directors for a long time. And Bradley Eros is the visionary longtime member. Since when?
25 years. So
25, I think longer.
maybe longer.
Yeah, maybe longer. It feels like 25 years. So I thought that I would introduce Lynn Sachs, who makes what I think are amazing documentary films. And she will tell you about her relationship with the co-op, and we can start. I'll ask one question later about documentaries and the concept of documentaries, but I'd like Lynn to talk about the co-op and herself and making films.
So I'm really thrilled and honored to be here, and I thank all M.M Serra for inviting me to have a chance to talk about the films which are part of the Museum of the Moving Image Retrospective, which is currently running right now, and the retrospective will go until January 31st if you want to see any of the work. And it also includes my new, very long in the making, 35 years in the making film, which is called Film About a Father Who. But it's pretty interesting that the co-op is celebrating its 60th birthday in 2021, because I am also celebrating my 60th birthday this year. So we're like twins in a sense. And I thought that it was important at this point in my life to acknowledge that, yes, I have a large family, but I also have a family which is the filmmaking family that spreads really across the world, but very intensely for me is the filmmaking community in New York, the avant-garde film community, the experimental film community, which I identify so strongly. And a big part of that was the 3 people here, M.M Serra, Bradley Eros, and Jack Waters, who are like my siblings. We confide in each other. We've guided the organization, and the organization itself has supported and sustained us so with such enthusiasm. And so we give back, it gives to us. It's a bond. So that's why I thought it would be fun for the 4 of us to have a conversation about this retrospective, but also to be able to talk with all of you. And I have like a lot of friends here who are today, and there's people I don't know. And I'm very interested in your thoughts. If you were able to attend the films, or maybe you've seen them before, you just want to ask a general question. So we want it to run really like ecstatically and freely, and the way that I know Rachel will be able to handle. So I'm going to pass it back to Sarah, but I just wanted to welcome everybody and say how glad we are for you to be here this hour.
I'm going to introduce Jack Waters.
Oh.
Is Jack, or is it Bradley Eros? Oh,
Go ahead, Jack.
There's Jack.
No, we can go in reverse alphabetical order.
Yeah.
I'm saying,
Oh,
going
I'm
fast.
sorry. We're going alphabetical.
No, reverse. We like to take,
Reverse.
we like to do it differently.
Oh,
here.
I want to start.
Jack Waters is an amazing part of the community. He's a gardener. He has La Petite Versailles. Not only does he and Peter Kramer, who have been together for 40 years, create together. They have a band together. They have the most amazing garden in New York City, a community garden, Allied Productions. So it's not only making the work, it's being part of the community and being political at the same time. And I like, even I'll share one personal note. Someone asked me for a contract. Want to give their negatives to the co-op, and so I called Jack, and Jack sent me a contract to revise. So Jack is like, he participates almost on a daily basis, politically and creatively. So this is Jack, the amazing Jack Waters.
Hello. So glad. It's like really wonderful to see all of these faces. And I wanted to start out by saying that if anyone has not seen Lynn's retrospective, it's only until the end of the month. And it's really amazing. There's such an incredible wealth of material that spans, 20, 25 more. It's like, I think, like tracing back to the early 80s.
Yep.
And Lynn, I know Lynn's work. I know most of your more recent work, of work in the more recent years, which has, as M.M said, drifted towards a documentary approach, but they're not really documentaries. They're experimental. And so the thing that I think is really the most incredible thing to get out of this retrospective is that it really gives you a chance to see how, like, the experimental approach connects in Lynn's work, how there's a cohesion throughout, like the whole body of the film, the whole body of work. And for me, one of the outstanding themes that I'm seeing, and I have to say, after seeing a film about a father who is now coloring a lot of my recognition and understanding of the entire body of work in many different ways. Texturally, but most of all familially. And as Lynn says, she comes from a big family. Extended family becomes a part of that narrative. And the way, and more importantly, the idea that is, especially as we all know, one of the hallmarks of experimental film, tactility, texture, and particularly the body. So, yeah, I mean, that's really the thing that impressed me the most is the intimacy throughout the entire range, but how it's handled in so many different ways. And I hope this will be a chance for us to at least delve into a tip of it through Lynn's own words and to kind of get back to her. And I feel like that's enough of an introductory statement here.
So thank you, Jack, for that. And it's always been difficult for me to accept these divisions between the notion of documentary, which would be working with reality, and the experimental film, because I actually think that any film you ever make, anything, is a document of a group of people getting together. or a person getting together with a flower, or a person watching light as it hits the sidewalk. Those are documents of an experience. And so I think it all kind of starts that way. And in that sense, when you were talking about the texture, it makes me think about the fact that we're all in these isolated atoms or pods. And so part of texture is touch. Like that's something that in and of itself is not part of film, touch. But touch is something I wanted in my film. So I wanted to like enter the audience body and to touch. Like I use a lot of close-ups, so the camera almost touches. And I rarely use the zoom because I think you need to take your body into the space, into the aura of that skin or that texture, as you said. And so it's when you use the word family, it's also interesting because it's the literal idea of my family, but it's also the idea that when I work with people, I collaborate with them. A few years ago, really more and more started to resist this paradigm in documentary of you go and you shoot and you like you have someone's body and it's in your computer or your camera. And I like wanted to have long connections with the people who are in my films, from Tip of My Tongue to Your Day Is My Night. Those people I still know, I work with, we have lunch, we hang out, they become part of like that extended idea of not just community, but of family. And one of the things, for example, I'll just end with on that, when I was making Your Day Is My Night, one of the women, her name is Suet Lee, she's a 80-year-old Chinese American woman. She doesn't speak any English at all. So I always had to work with her with a translator, always. Every time we worked together, after about the third shoot, she wanted to hold hands. And that was such a beautiful thing. That was the tactile part of our collaboration. And it was also such a witnessing of a different culture, because Americans don't tend to do that. They don't hold hands with anybody but children mostly, or lovers. But she always wanted to hold my hand because that intimacy was part of the making of the film, not just like a conceit that I was exploring, but it really was part of our process.
Bradley's been
Who's his
on
friend?
board for 30 years, 35 years, and he loves puppets.
Let me just jump into Lynn, who I've loved for a long time. The thing that I want to say that I really got, and I think it makes this connection between what you would call your experimental films and your documentary films, though I would not call it.
I didn't divide it. I didn't divide it.
Yeah. But here's what I want to say about the connection between them is that what I see, and I've looked at all of these works now, and just looked at the Father film yesterday. I see you as the eye of the hurricane. I see you as this calm in the center of the cyclone. And I see that that's something that you've used as a motif in many of the films with your daughters particularly. But it's interesting how I saw that in the Father film and how I see this in these other films where you go out into the world, is that you have this thing. But the thing that's significant about it, and that connects to what Jack is saying, is that you have this eye contact. And so the eye contact is physical. It's actually touching in this way. And that even though that you're often in the center of craziness and swirlingness and the world moving around you, whether it's the intimate family or whether it's a larger world, that you are like this calm presence, this kind of loving presence that looks at the world. And I see that connection there. That's like a physical connection that you make with the eye contact. And in many of your films, you have that where you're shooting and the subject is looking directly at you. And whether it's what happens with your father, or whether what happens with your daughter, or whether it's what happens with strangers, is that you have this presence there. But a lot of times it really is the center of a cyclone, the center of a tornado, the center of a hurricane. Even this image, amazing image that's in your Father film of viewing destruction at a distance. It's a really powerful image there that I guess he's preparing some site that he's going to put a hotel in. I'm not really sure what that is, but it's interesting.
Quarry.
Yeah. It's interesting that image of destruction at a distance that still had this amazing calm, your center of calm watching that. And the way that you connect to the siblings, the way you connect to family, the way you connect to the workers, the way you connect to your daughters, your husband, all of those things come through. But very, very often it literally is this image that the world is swirling around you in a way, and that you have this presence and this direct, this tactile contact. And
Well,
you
Bradley,
make the eye contact, you make the eye physical in that way.
and
Tactile.
that one of the things that I was thinking of, Bradley, when you bring that up, is that I'm also looking at the way that Lynn works with her subjects, because it's very gentle, it's very caring, it's very respectful. But I believe, like all cinema, like the nature of filmmaking is this aspect of control. You're basically deciding what's in the frame, and then you have control over the editing. So no matter what's happening, you're directing and steering and making making the picture happen. And some of the things that I'm also looking at in that respect is being like this eye of the hurricane, is the fact that it's almost this elemental, Lynn's approaching things literally in this elemental fashion, where you can't control a storm, you can't control a tsunami, but you can surf and you can sail so that the power of the wind, the waves of natural forces, you can go with them so that you become one. And so when I look at at some of the films, and starting from the very early ones, what is it? The science,
House of Science.
House of Science.
House of Science,
Yeah.
which is basically, beginnings with a gynecological exam. And so that idea of someone, in particularly like a male professional force, a doctor. I mean, what's more controlling than the gynecologist? And I think MM and Lynn will speak better about this, because this idea of women and women's bodies. But then even when you have male bodies, there's the film where you have the subject, and it's like you talk about being obsessed by him, but at the same time you talk about being obsessed by his obsession. And so it has this there is definitely this voyeuristic turn of the table, a female gaze aspect of it. So in all of the films, there is this aspect of control, but not in a typical way, not in a way that you would expect. And I think it is very tornado-like, because you don't really know which way the twister's going to take you.
I have a very general, broad, I think it's important to talk about actually, Lynn and I were on a panel documentary at the Millennium talking about making documentary films and experimental documentaries. And documentary is storytelling. Lynn tells amazing stories. But say you're in Flaherty. Flaherty strives for a certain truth, a search for truth, for facts, for intimacy, and the use of language for communication and expression. And I think that it's an important topic to bring up right now, because of I was watching the news, the Republican committee in Oregon declared that the riots were fake news, that what they were seeing, what they were watching did not take place, and that it was staged. And so I think documentaries and storytellings are important. I feel all Lynn's films are about Lynn, which I think is amazing. Aesthetics and form. And when I watched film about a father who, I thought it was interesting what she says, that he didn't lie to her. It's just that he didn't tell her. And right away, it frightens me. What don't you know? What are you keeping from the children? And it's what she doesn't say that gives me a sense. You could say, I know you love him. I love my dad. but it's like what is unsaid. And so my question for Lynn is how you, just about documentaries, fake news, how you approach, are you searching for the truth? Or do you see
I'm
there?
going to do a little
Mhm.
triad here and start with Bradley and then come over to Jack and then go to Sarah. So Bradley, you were talking about the eye of the hurricane, and I'd never thought about that work, the work that way. And it's really like a fantastic, very sculptural and very, very much a weather conceit that fascinates me, because in the eye, you do have this moment, you have a moment to contemplate, but you know that something is coming. You've already witnessed what happened, and I'm super interested in history. So to be in the eye of the storm recognizes the history, but also recognizes that we're in a moment, that we're in anticipation, because I think that is one of the, like, the seductive parts of filmmaking to me, that I anticipate my, well, a word that you use, Jack, I anticipate things that I will not be able to control. And that as much as I might think it's a good thing to control, I know that I will continue to be excited about it because I can't control it.
Mhm.
That's why actually I never really wanted to make a narrative film, because I thought, sorry if any of you are like making great narrative films, but I thought, oh, well, a narrative film, the intention is to fulfill what that script asked us to do. And so, and then you know, they have you have the script supervisor, and she or he is keeping you rolling along to follow the rules. But what I like is that thing after the eye of the storm, after you've made work for long enough, we realize that that's the after part that is going to challenge you and awaken you, like intellectually. And Edo Choi, who's the curator for the program, I loved his title that he said between thought and expression. So the thought is like the planning and the control. And it's interesting because I don't really work like a documentary filmmaker. I do a lot of mise en scène. I think of anybody in front of my camera as a performer. And I like to do many takes, and I don't care if the first take is the one that gives me the information. I'll say, well, like, let's try it again. And do you like the way your body moved? And do you want to try it again, like lying on the ground? And just like, I like people to be not in their comfortable situation, for them to feel like I love, for example, in documentary, having people wear costumes and calling them wardrobe, because then the minute that you announce that you're using things like that, then they're participating in something that is beyond their lives. And that shift away from their lives or our lives means that we're in this other world that is only ours in this creative thing we're doing together. It's not my world per se. And like coming really out of the ethos of the Filmmakers Co-op, and I do not call myself a director, and I think most of us don't. You know, we make things like other artists do, and musicians, and we just love to make things. I'm a terrible cook, but that's another thing. But and then I actually, Sarah, you brought, oh, go on, Bradley.
I was just thinking about the title of the Between Thought and Expression, and I thought a lot about that. And I thought in your case, it seems like emotional thought and intellectual expression. It seems like you mix up what those two things would be as a separate thing. And so I think you have an emotional kind of thought and an intellectual kind of expression. And so it's not like the mind and the body, or the emotions versus the brain. It's like it's mixed in a really different way. You know, it's actually integrating those two concepts and not separating them.
You used the word story, and that was pretty interesting, because even like family members of mine, they always say, Lynn, you know, this movie's like my newest film about a father who, and they know the story, they lived it, but they'll say like, this one's more accessible than your others because there's kind of like a story there. And then I'll say, yeah, I'm really bad at story. I'm really bad. And I'm never, ever going to make a character driven, even this one. I'm never going to make a character driven movie. It's more about that hurricane that you were talking, or that tornado, that's like all about people who are involved in the whirlwind of creating something.
You shape
That's
things
what I was
through
gonna
the
say.
persona, whether we consider them characters in a literal sense or persona. And I noticed in film about a father who, as well as I'm sorry, I'm not quick enough with the titles, but
I know them.
there's a woman rolling down the hill, down a
That's House
hill.
of Science. House
The
of
house
Science.
science.
Yeah, oh, this is okay. Okay, so the relationship that you make very clear between the two of you is how you're basically making that happen, and in both situations, and it's a very gentle persuasion, I think,
Mhm.
but still something where you know what you want to see. You may not know exactly how it's going to end up, but you still have the idea and the shape, whether it's a physical action like in the House of Science, or whether it's an emotional one where you actually do get people to talk
Mhm.
and you get people to say things that they may not have wanted to say.
Mhm.
And so it's a that persuasiveness. Is that something that is in your mind? Is that something you consider a modus?
Could I ask Lynn a question about the culture we're living in and broadcast and documentary and political? Because I think that uh, I, you know, political or like what's happening on the news, the fake news, information, it's all storytelling. And I agree with Jack. I think that Lynn scripts everything. Like your day is my night. I could tell those people were actors because that's Lynn's language, not a.
Oh no, it was
That was, yeah, but you clarified their stories.
yes, yes,
Tell
yes,
me you,
yes,
yes, I
definitely,
know
definitely.
you clarified their
Yeah,
stories
I did.
because immigrant, because your language is more sophisticated. And I also felt that the intimacy, the close up, sometimes you don't have an establishing shot. Like you know where I am, you don't know where they are. They could be in your living room. They could be in, you know what I mean? So I thought it would, I think that you direct your films and script them, and they're very much. But anyway, could you? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say you were asking about political issues and when during the war in Iraq, you and I and Bradley and Jack, we organized a collective of films called For Life Against the War Again, because it had been done in the 60s, and we asked people to bring work to a venue called the Collective Unconscious, and lo and behold, we had so many films we had to do 2 shows, and people brought work, and we ended up making a DVD with it all. And it's always been a commitment of mine, and also like not a commitment sounds like an obligation, but a fascination. You could talk about it being like Hegelian, like I'm interested in conflict and the resolution, or you could say that I'm interested in how art making can be engaged, or as people say, flip it, like engagé. And so, and or how the world can be changed by any kind of form of disobedience. And I like that, disobedience. And we thought, some of y'all know I made a film called Investigation of a Flame about nonviolent
One of my
disobedience
favorites.
against the Vietnam War. And that kept coming to my mind. Like, I like when people break the law, but if they do it with a kind of awareness of people's lives and of people's property, even if it's something like, vulnerable and small and whatever. So those have been concerns of mine, and that kind of in a more gender specific way, I think, in a film specific way, if you talk about politics, you have to talk about the making of the work. So, what is a feminist lens? I think everybody in this, I don't think a feminist lens is only a woman's lens. I think it's an awareness and recognition of the body, and without framing it in an exploitive way. So the word politic can come up in a lot of different ways. I wanted to say something to Jack about the woman rolling down the hill that sometimes people think is found footage. It is not. It has a lot to do with the physicality of filmmaking that I love. So I wanted to go to Death Valley. It was my very first time, and I took my 16mm Bolex to a sandy place. I know you're not, and I did, this is in the early 90s. And I took a friend of mine, a woman, and I said, okay, I really want to see you roll down the hill. And she said, I'm not taking my clothes off unless you do. And so I shot that film with my clothes off. And I'm sure you can connect with this, Jack, because you know, we like that. We want to equalize. We don't want the person who's directing or the person who happens to own the camera or know how to work the camera. And Sarah, that's a big part of your work too. Like how is the body engaged with by the person who's making the work, and how do we bring ourselves to the same level? And like you, Sarah, you've talked so much about the difference between pornography and like erotic or recognition, freedom of expression. And so I used to have a period of time where my family would say, are you going to make another movie where you take your clothes off? But the thing was, the first time I took my clothes, no, it wasn't the first time, because I did it in the 80s too. But in like the early 90s, when I took off my clothes for the House of Science, I thought, this makes sense. You know, and the other part is that I got to feel the sand. I got this delight. So thank you. That's the House of Science DVD. But you know, that was important, to the physicality swirling around the camera, not just in front of it.
Could I just say one thing for the Filmmakers Coop? Rachel Guma and I curated another film protest, right, Rachel? It's called, it's 3 programs. Do you want to say something about it, Rachel, briefly? Not to get off topic.
I'm all for protest.
Yeah, it was just in solidarity. So it was a screening, 3 screenings that we did virtually on Vimeo on demand, and a lot of filmmakers. Lily White was in it, and a lot of different. I just saw Lily's name here today, so yeah, and it was
from all over the world, right?
All over the world, yeah. We had people all over the world submit, and it was really, really powerful. And you know, especially in this last year that we survived, to have that
Vimeo on demand, right?
That in solidarity, basically, yeah. So
should we open it up to questions from the chat?
I think so.
I think so too.
Anyone want to raise your hand or shout out?
Or just spin it over to the chat and we'll hear from you.
Let's see. We had Natasha. Natasha, would you like to ask your question?
So I wanted to just know, Lynn, I remember I met you a couple years ago at Athens.
Athens. I remember.
Yeah. And we just missed each other at Yaddo. And so you ended up being like, we have this cross section of friends. But I just watched a film about a father who, and I was blown away by how you designed this to sort of flow. And I just wanted to know, what was your process? How did you find the architecture for it?
I love that you call it architecture, and I love that I'm talking about this at the Filmmakers Co-op. So I didn't know where to begin, and I didn't want to begin at the beginning. I didn't want to tell a chronological story. I wanted to make it work in a more associative way, and I wanted things to kind of reveal themselves in formal ways, not just as they happened in my life. And so what I did the first year was I realized I had no idea what I was doing, and that I was going through 35 years of footage. And sometimes I felt ashamed looking at it for reasons like I thought it was ugly, and sometimes I was ashamed because of the content. And so I worked with my friend Rebecca Shappas, who's also was a student of mine at NYU and a fantastic artist. And she edited the film with me, and we looked at every single bit of the film. And I said to her, I don't know really what the beginning and the end is, and I don't want to know yet. Let's make 12 experimental films. So we spent the first year making distinct films, like films about girlfriends, or films about like color, or films about tension, just like different kinds of themes. And each little short film had to have a beginning, had to have a moment of like awareness, and then had to have a kind of resolution. And then after that year, I spent another year pulling them all apart with Rebecca. And so we had this flow, and I trusted her emotionally, I trusted her artistically. We are just really understand each other, and we played instead of following a a plan. And things happened while I was making the film that had to be integrated. My father came and lived with me for a few weeks so that we could shoot together. Rebecca and I would just do all different kinds of things, and then we'd see if it worked. And it was not like post-production ever. And then actually towards the end of the film, when I was working on the credits, and I said that I wanted it to look something like a mix between a family tree and a kind of diagramming. And Rebecca had gone to Catholic school, and she knew about diagramming. So we worked with her friend Rachel, and who does fantastic animation. And Rachel had also known diagramming, even though they're in their 20s, and nobody does diagramming much anymore. But so those were different kinds of structures, because there was a lot in the film about grammar, like the right way to do things and the wrong way. And I like experimental films, so I accept the so-called wrong way as an experimental way of living. And sometimes the wrong way can like create a pain, and sometimes it creates like a lot of fun, as you saw with my dad. Yeah. Thank you for that question, though. The structure is always, every movie I make, the structure ultimately is the hardest part.
I have a quick question to follow
Yeah.
up on that. Did you ever consider making a non-linear digital film that did not have a linear structure, and it was actually a film that might have been more like a diagram? Like you might have made a digital non-linear work that would have been those 12 different films, and you could interact in them, because it seemed like the life of your father was very non-linear, and
Yeah.
was like this big tree, and that it would have made some sense in this case to make maybe a work that, or maybe a version of this film which is not a linear based film.
I hate to admit it, but I'll tell you, the first time I tried to make the film was in 1991, and I made it as an installation with these light boxes that I did that I put up at hall walls in Buffalo. And I was living in San Francisco at the time, so it was like my first opportunity to do a media arts installation, and I flew to Buffalo, and I wanted it to actually include dirt, because my dad was interested in land. So when I got to Buffalo, I collected dirt all over the city, and it was kind of like that in a way. And then I thought, okay, I still haven't done it. And then I did a bunch of, like, every time I thought about making this film, it was in a different iteration. And then I would it wasn't so much that I got distracted, I got scared. And then I would do something else that I could handle better. And then at a certain point in my life, I said, I would like to really dive into this, and for it to be something that takes on its own shape. Because working in an installation format still leaves these fissures, and can I figure out, the hardest part was the glue, so that I had that can I figure out how to put them together, because keeping them apart in those discrete ways was maybe easier.
But Lynn, you're talking about your family. You actually put your family together on film. You actually put you know, all your family together. It's your family that were living apart, that you weren't living with, even your family that you didn't know, your brothers and sisters. I thought the film brought everyone together and made a family.
Yeah,
And
that
I have a
kind of
little-
connects to what we were talking about earlier. I think the notion with people who don't make art, most of my family members don't, but the idea that we were working on something together made, I mean, Jack, you probably found that with the play, or, you know, anybody who gets involved, once they feel that it adds meaning to their life. It adds meaning, that's all. It's not that we're working on a movie, we can work in it, but it adds a layer of meaning, then people get, then it helps them to bring out other things. Are there other questions, Rachel, that you want to?
Rohisia.
Yeah,
Rohisia.
Peter has a question.
Oh,
Oh.
Peter. Hi, Peter.
Hey there, Lynn. How are you?
I'm
Good to
good.
see everybody. Maybe this is too soon a question, but it could be answered after other questions. And that was, what are the current projects that you're working on now?
Oh,
And I did think of another question, you know, looking at your films and just if you'd speak about the milieu of your arrival in New York and who were the filmmakers that you were introduced to and that may have helped shape or inspire, you know, certain approaches and things like that.
oh, I love that.
Thank
Okay.
you.
So I'll just tell you about a film I might have finished today, a 3-minute film. I love short films. I don't even like the word short to define it. It's like defining an atheist. Why do you have to define an atheist because that person doesn't believe in God? It's stupid, you know? And we are always defined by what the establishment says or what the mainstream says. So anyway, I made a film. And I'm just telling you, it's 3 minutes and 48 seconds. And I was asked by the Punta de Vista Film Festival to write a letter to a filmmaker who had been important to me. And I decided to write a letter to 10 filmmakers were asked to do it. I decided to write a letter to Jean Vigo and to write to him. He's no longer alive. He made a film called Hero for Conduct in the 1930s. And after January 6th, I was thinking about conduct, like when people get 0 for how they behave. So, so I made this little short film, which is a letter to Jean Vigo about the difference between play and like conduct and pain and causing pain. And I also thought about the novel, The Lord of the Flies, like when play gets the worst of you and then you start to destroy. So it's that sounds like a mouthful for 3 minutes, but it's all found footage. And so it's just something that I did today. So that's the most current thing. And then you asked about New York, and I was in San Francisco during a fantastic time, I want to say, for filmmaking, and worked with Craig Baldwin and Trenti Minha and Barbara Hammer, Bruce Conner. They were all like, Carolee Schneemann was there then for a while. It was all like a very, very exciting time. But then my partner, Mark Street, wanted to move to New York. And I'm like, well, okay, let's go to New York. And, I met all of you all then. Sarah, Bradley, Jack, and Jeannie Leota, Mark McElhatton, they were just really critical people, and Alan Berliner. Alan Berliner and I met when Mark and I were walking down the street on Houston Street, and we had our stroller with our little baby who's now 25, and we saw Alan, and we like hailed him from practically like across the sidewalk or street, and we said to Alan, our first date was at your movie, and now we have this baby, and we just moved to New York, and he's been like a dear friend ever since. So that's the way New York turned out for us. And it's like New York gets a bad name for itself. People are super friendly. I'll say one other thing about New York. We moved to Baltimore for 3 years, 98 to 2001, and we came back, and my younger daughter, Noah, said, I want to move back to New York because people yell at each other from across the street and they talk to, she was really little at the time. And nobody, you know, in other cities, people are just quiet, but she's like, people yell at each other in New York. I like that. So we ended up back in New York, and there's Alan.
Rohisi has a question.
Okay.
Hi.
Rohisia,
Rohisi gets to yell out.
I have to give a shout out to Rohisia because she is here tonight from New Zealand.
Hi, everybody. Lynn, I've been really enjoying your films. Thank you so much. But you've spoken a little bit to this, but I really get fascinated by the sense when you bring an actor in, like the Spanish woman. I think she was in your laundry one and also in
Good.
The Day.
Yes.
And like, it just brings this kind of slight formality to something that's very relaxed and a little bit impromptu, but I kind of wonder if you could talk to that thing of how much you talk to the people before you have the conversations that you actually film. I think also in the one about your 50th, there's a sense that maybe you've had those conversations before you film them, and then you film them when you find that they've got an interesting story. There's something like that. I really like it a lot. I just wonder if you could talk about it.
Yeah. So I almost never work with anyone who calls themselves actors. And in fact, my very, very first film that some of you saw called Still Life with Women and Four Objects, which was maybe, I don't know if I'm embarrassed about this, but I have to say it. I was very influenced by Jean-Luc Godard and like a kind of Brechtian deconstruction of the whole process of filmmaking. And so in that film, 1986, I asked this woman who was in a class with me if she'd put a coat on 3 times, and then I'd film her. And then I realized I liked every time. It wasn't take 1, take 2, take 1, or take 2, or take 3. I liked the repetition. And I did that again in Tip of My Tongue. You might have seen a woman, she walks up to a window, and the first time she opens it, she hears the sounds of Baghdad. And then another time she opens it and she hears the sounds of Brooklyn. Another time she just hears like the birds outside. And so I wanted it to be like very formally, a formal register of that this person is performing. And so that was a big part of Your Day Is My Night. And so one of the reasons I brought in the Puerto Rican woman actually was because while I was making the film, the people in Your Day Is My Night kept telling me how boring it was, that their lives were boring, and why would anybody want to watch a movie about their lives? And they told me that over and over. They said, there's a problem with this film that you've been shooting for the last year. There's no story, and it's just about us, and you really need to make it better. And so I felt obligated to make it better. I felt obligated to entertain them while they were making it. So I decided, well, I'll bring in this Spanish-speaking woman from Puerto Rico, and that'll make it feel more like a story, which is what they want. Like, they didn't want it to be a film, they wanted it to be a movie. And if we had an actor come in, so she came in, and then I said, well, okay, what would you say if a Spanish woman walked into your own apartment? And so that's what we did. And so it shook it up. And that's like, kind of like what Bradley was talking about, the hurricane. Like, I had to anticipate, as a director or filmmaker, I had to anticipate something that would make them be excited, because I don't like to work with people unless they're excited to work with me. So that was like, it's all like coming up with scenarios. And it's true in Tip of My Tongue that I had actually spent 2 years talking to all the people in that film. I'd asked them a very specific question about the intersection between their personal lives and their private and public lives. And then I knew what they were going to say. And that's why I put certain people together. And it's a little bit of, call it mise en scène in that French way.
Michelle Handelman is asking a question through the chat. She's
here.
No, I know, but she's put her question in the chat. Michelle, do you want to ask it out loud, or should I read it?
Bring her
Michelle.
on. Bring her on.
Bring on Michelle.
All right, I think I'm unmuted, but I'm not, my camera's not on, and I actually don't have a mic, so I hope you can hear
We
me.
can hear you.
Okay, good, because I always have such a loud voice. Lynn, I just want to, I mean, we talk about things all the time, but I just want to ask, now that you put this retrospective together and you've looked at the programs, and I'm assuming probably rewatched most of it, has anything surprised you? I mean, is there something like that you've learned about your own work that never occurred to you before? And you just like, now it's been 25 years, you saw it and you just went, wow, I didn't realize this is what I've been doing all these years.
Yeah,
That's a good question.
that's a really, okay. All right, let me say one thing. I like a good lecture that's not planned, where you watch the person giving, like, I don't like PowerPoints because they're too frozen at all. I like the point where people go, I gotta think about that. Oh my goodness, I gotta think about that. I think that it does have to do with that that look, that eye contact, really going back to my film Drawn and Quartered, you know, which I made in the early 80s, where I was willing to find a kind of vulnerability. And, you know, I think about the fact that we all think about the fact that Jonas Mekas didn't like calling films experimental films. We're like, yeah, we know he didn't like
He didn't like calling them documentary.
No, I don't like either term either. I really don't. But I do like the word experiment because I do feel an affiliation with the world of science, in that you just don't know what the heck is going to happen, and you're trying to figure it out, and you're bringing in the litmus paper, and you're bringing in the chemistry, and you're bringing, and so I think almost every film that I make is like a little attempt to see what the heck will happen. And I look back at those, like if we go on the playground, or, you know, like it's interesting when people go on vacations, that's almost like making a film because they're out of their comfort zone. And so I think that each, what maybe the thread with all of these is just this curiosity that made me take some risks, and I can see it in all of those. And you know, I have like films that people never watch. We all do. Like my film biography of Lilith, hardly anybody ever watches it, and it's fine. But I think part of it is like it gives a lot of angst, and I like the risk that I took in it. But the risk might not have worked out, but I like that risk that I took with some people who took the risk with me.
Is it in the retrospective?
No, it's not.
No. I mean,
So,
it sounds like what you're saying is that if you have experiments, you might fail. You know, you're saying you're going to fail if you experiment, and that's,
it's actually only interesting if I might fail.
Yeah.
I mean,
But
really,
you don't fail, you just evolve. It's organic.
You know.
Sure, Spiegel has the question.
Wait, we have 1 hour.
There's one more question.
Sure, Spiegel has the question.
Yeah, Shira has
one
a
more.
question,
okay.
and doesn't have a mic, so wanted me to ask it for them. I'm curious if anyone ever accused your father of being a cult-like figure to his many partners, and also where and how you like the narrative aspects of the film, and the ways in which the experimental mode allows not all of the narrative connections to be overt.
Ooh, those are.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That question.
That was from Shira Segal.
Nice.
Good question, Shira.
Yeah. You
That's
know,
intense.
yeah. I think my dad was kind of like, or is, he's alive, but for those many years, I think he was a kind of a Pied Piper for men as much as women. And one man came up to me who'd known my dad a long time and said, you know, a lot of us were trying to emulate him, but then we didn't, but then we did for part of the time. And he felt kind of awkwardly culpable. And the thing is that my father, like many people, has qualities that are full of charisma. Just in his actions, he's not a very verbal person and never was, but he always did kind of idiosyncratic things that at certain points I was like, you know, ashamed because you want your dad or your parents to be like everybody else's. And then it was a flip for me as an artist to say, actually, the fact that he decorated all these buses in hippie style or had weird amphibious ducks he drove around Memphis, and just things like that allowed me to see what you could do in the world. But then there was this other side where people were hurt and you know, things were sacrificed. So that was problematic, but also intrigue. I mean, both. It was both. The narrative connections in that film, and you know, some people have written about film about a father who, to say in a critical way, to say I didn't really get it straight, and I can't figure out how many mothers there really were, and I'm like, that is exactly what I wanted to happen. I didn't want you to have to, I didn't want to offer transparency because I wanted the narrative formally to be parallel or a mirror to the sensations that we had as a child. And if I had absolute clarity when you finished, then you would have a different kind of resolution than I ever had. And like just yesterday, I was thinking about, give me a lot of, you know, that Jeopardy thing, like give me a lot of answers and I'll give you some really good questions. So I had enough answers to offer questions to you all so that maybe you all and the audience or people viewing, that you turn back on your own narrative. And I don't mind fissures. I like ellipsis, like all of that is I think activates us as viewers and as like as human beings.
Thank you, Lynn.
Yeah.
That was beautiful. Let's give a round of applause for Lynn Sachs for brilliant.
And I'll say one more time, if you want to see the retrospective, it's going on till the 31st. And I just learned from the museum, if you buy the pass to see the whole retrospective, even on the 31st, you have a week more. Because someone wrote me to ask that. So the films will be available in a week after the 31st, depending on your schedule. I love having puppets with us. I love having you all. These are honestly some of my favorite people in the world. I want to keep the chat so I can study it.
Good.
And if you want to be on our eye contact list and find out what we're up to, if you can give us your email, I think we have everybody's email, but if we don't, please give us your email in the chat, and Rachel and I will put you on.
And then we know that your works are distributed through the Filmmakers Co-op. But do you have like Vimeo and YouTube? Do you have Vimeo?
Oh, those are good questions. A lot of them are, yes. A few on YouTube, a lot on Vimeo. But I also wanted to add that Film About a Father Who, for the first time in my life, is actually being distributed theatrically. So it's in like 26, it's actually in like 20, maybe 30 cities right now.
Excellent.
It's really interesting for me because I've discovered, there's this small independent virtual now currently cinema in, for example, in Detroit called the Film Lab, and there's a place in Santa Ana, Orange County, California called the Frida. And then there's the Belcourt in Nashville. I mean, I have like a big list now through Cinema Guild, but I'll share it with the co-op. But it's amazing how many people are, or how many organizations are really trying to make a go of it. There's the Cleveland Cinematheque I've learned about. I didn't know about any of those places. And they all have these groups of people who are doing their programming. And
we're helping them stay alive.
Yeah.
And that's amazing.
But I wanted to clarify, to emphasize that, like, this may be, you won't have a chance to see all of this collection of work that's in this retrospective, and they speak to each other. Like the combination of them is a very rare opportunity. So I encourage people to really, really get to see them because they're amazing.
Thank you.
I just
And also, if you want to see In Solidarity, the 3 programs that protest films, short protest films, they're on the VOD for the Filmmakers Co-op.
I wanted to do one more thank you to the Museum of the Moving Image and to Eric Hines, who's the curator there, and Edo Choi, who is a brilliant curator and beautiful assistant curator and beautiful, like his writing. If I think y'all would agree, like if you work really hard on your films, but you don't know how to write about them exactly, and he is really out of the ballpark, good writer. And thinks a lot about experimental film, and so it was.
And he's been working a long time in experimental film. He was in Chicago, and
to have him look through he watched all of my movies, and he came up with that program. So it was really a gift.
And we love you all, and we're going to wish you all a good night and lots of love from the Film Co-op, Rachel, and all my Bradley, and especially Lynn, Peter. Who else? Oh my God, we have those in Lily White, Jack Waters, Susan. We love you all for coming, and Lynn, amazing.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thanks, everybody.